The fog rolls in from San Francisco Bay every morning at 5:47 a.m. It's so predictable you could set your watch by it. The guards at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary know this. They've learned to listen for the foghorns, to watch how the mist swallows the island, turning the most infamous prison in America into a ghost ship floating in gray nothing. They know the fog makes visibility impossible, makes the guard towers useless, makes the distance between the island and the mainland feel infinite, even though it's only 1.25 miles of freezing water, filled with currents that have drowned better swimmers than any prisoner. But there's something the guards don't know on this particular morning in December 1962. Something that won't be discovered until the 7 a.m. count reveals an empty cell in the women's section of the cell house. A section so small and so rarely discussed that most people don't even realize Alcatraz held female prisoners. Her name was Marion Parker, Inmate AZ-1441, and she'd just done what 36 men had tried and failed to do over Alcatraz's 29 years as a federal prison. She'd escaped, and unlike those men, who either drowned, were shot, or crawled back to shore half dead from hypothermia, Marion Parker made it. This is the story of how she did what everyone said was impossible. Let's rewind to understand who Marion Parker was and why she ended up on an island designed to hold America's most dangerous criminals. Marion wasn't a gangster or a murderer. She was a thief, but not just any thief. By 1960, at age 34, she'd robbed 17 banks across 6 states. Not with a gun, not with violence, with charm, intelligence, and a talent for forgery that made her one of the FBI's most wanted women. She'd walk into banks dressed immaculately, present forged documents with confidence that made tellers never question their authenticity, and walk out with thousands of dollars before anyone realized what had happened. They called her the Paper Rose. The nickname came from a detective in Chicago who said she was beautiful and delicate looking until you got too close. Then the thorns drew blood. Marion had been arrested 4 times before. Each time, she'd escaped from custody before trial. Twice from county jails by convincing guards she needed medical attention, then disappearing from hospitals. Once from a federal courthouse by simply walking out a side door, while marshals were distracted by a commotion she'd arranged with an accomplice. The 4th time, she'd been held in a maximum security women's facility, and she escaped by hiding in a laundry truck. By the time they caught her for the 5th time in 1961, the FBI was done playing games. They wanted her somewhere she couldn't charm her way out. Somewhere escape was impossible. They sent her to Alcatraz. Here's what most people don't know about Alcatraz. While it's famous as a men's prison that held Al Capone and Machine Gun Kelly, there was a small women's section that operated from 1934 to 1963. Never more than a dozen women at any time. They were housed in a separate cell block, kept isolated from male prisoners, and generally forgotten by history, because acknowledging women at Alcatraz complicated the mythology of the place as a fortress for the most dangerous men in America. Marion was one of only 8 women incarcerated there when she arrived in March 1962. The prison's security was legendary. The island itself was surrounded by frigid water with currents so strong that officials claimed swimming to shore was impossible. The cell house was reinforced concrete and steel. Guards conducted counts 5 times a day. Tool and key inventories happened multiple times per shift. Every piece of metal, every implement that could potentially be used in an escape was accounted for obsessively. The women's section had additional restrictions. Female inmates were never allowed in the recreation yard at the same time as men. Their work assignments were limited to the prison laundry and kitchen. Their cells were searched more frequently than men's. The assumption was that women, being physically weaker, would be even less capable of escape than male prisoners. This assumption was Marion's first advantage. She spent her first 6 months studying. Not maps or schedules. Those would have been too obvious if found during searches. She studied people, learned which guards were meticulous and which were lazy. Noticed that the guard supervising the women's laundry, Officer Helen Morrison, had bad knees that made her slow on stairs. Observed that the kitchen supervisor, a civilian employee named Ruth Chen, always took her break at exactly 2:15 p.m. every day. Discovered that the prisoner who delivered clean linens to the women's cells was a man named Frank Morris. Yes, that Frank Morris, who would later become famous for the June 1962 Alcatraz escape, and that he was planning something ambitious. Marion did something unprecedented. She approached Frank Morris with a proposal. She'd noticed things in the women's section that could help his escape attempt. In exchange for information, she wanted to know his methods. Frank was initially suspicious. Helping a female prisoner could complicate his plans. But Marion offered him something valuable. She'd observed that guards checking the women's cells were less thorough with certain items, things associated with feminine hygiene and personal care that male guards were uncomfortable examining closely. This meant she could hide tools or materials in places that would never be searched. Frank and his co-conspirators needed a secure location to stash supplies. Marion could provide it. Over 3 months, Marion hid hacksaw blades, stolen from the prison workshop and smuggled piece by piece inside hollowed-out books in her cell. She concealed wire cutters in boxes of tampons that guards never opened. She stored sections of a makeshift raft, stolen raincoat material, glued together inside her mattress. In exchange, Frank taught her what he and his partners were learning: how to calculate the tides by observing debris floating in the bay, how to create realistic dummy heads from soap and hair to fool guards during counts, how to navigate the prison's ventilation system, information that Marion was absorbing and adapting to her own escape plan. But Marion's plan differed fundamentally from Frank's. The men were planning to escape through ventilation shafts, accessing the roof, then using the raft to reach Angel Island. Marion knew she couldn't physically accomplish the climbing and crawling required. She needed a different route, and she found it in the laundry. The prison laundry processed not just inmate clothing, but also linens for the guard families who lived on the island, along with certain materials from the mainland brought over on the supply boat. Every Thursday, the boat arrived with deliveries, then took away industrial laundry bags filled with materials going to commercial cleaning facilities in San Francisco. The bags were loaded onto the boat by male prisoners under guard supervision. The bags were checked. Guards poked them with poles to ensure no one was hiding inside. But the checks were cursory because the bags weighed only about 40 pounds each, too light to conceal a full-grown person. Marion realized the weight restriction was an assumption based on typical adults. But Marion was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed barely 100 pounds. She could fit in a laundry bag, and if she compressed herself correctly, might not raise suspicions during the pull check. But there was a problem. She couldn't get into a bag that was already loaded and under guard supervision. She needed to be in the bag before it reached the loading dock. That meant hiding inside a bag in the laundry room, remaining undetected for potentially hours, then enduring the journey by boat while sealed in canvas, and finally escaping after the bag was delivered to the cleaning facility. The plan required inhuman patience and extraordinary timing. Marion began preparation in November 1962. She started eating less, losing weight to make herself smaller. She practiced breathing slowly to reduce oxygen consumption. She'd need to survive in the bag for possibly 3 or 4 hours, with limited air. She stole a small blade from the kitchen, thin enough to hide, but sharp enough to cut through canvas from inside if she needed to escape the bag in an emergency, and she waited for the perfect Thursday. Frank Morris and his partners escaped on June 11, 1962. The escape made national news. FBI investigations swarmed the island. Security became impossibly tight for months. Marion's plans were frozen. She knew attempting anything during the heightened scrutiny would be suicide. So she waited, watched as security gradually relaxed, as months passed without finding Frank Morris or his partners. Watched as guards convinced themselves that the heightened security had worked, that no one would dare try another escape so soon. This complacency was exactly what Marion needed. December 6, 1962 was the Thursday she chose, a date 6 months after the Morris escape, long enough that guards had relaxed, close enough to winter that the fog would be thick and reliable. Marion had observed that Officer Morrison's arthritis was worse in cold weather, making her even slower supervising the laundry. And critically, Ruth Chen was scheduled to be off the island that day for a medical appointment, meaning kitchen supervision would be handled by a substitute less familiar with routines. Marion volunteered for extra laundry duty that morning. This wasn't suspicious. Inmates often volunteered for work assignments to break the monotony of cell time. She worked normally until 1:45 p.m., when Officer Morrison left to conduct a security round of the women's cells. This gave Marion approximately 12 minutes unsupervised in the laundry room. She'd practiced the next steps dozens of times mentally, moved to the area where clean, outgoing laundry bags were stored, selected a bag destined for the mainland. They were tagged with colored clips, blue for mainland, red for island guard families. Climbed inside, used a technique she'd practiced to tie the bag closed from inside using a slip knot that looked secure, but could be released with one pull. The bag was canvas, tightly woven, but with enough gaps that air circulated. Marion had hollowed out space in the center by arranging linens around her in layers, creating a cushion that both concealed her form and provided some comfort. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate through meditation techniques she'd learned years ago, and she waited in absolute silence and darkness. Officer Morrison returned at 1:59 p.m., continued supervising other inmates, never noticed one of the outgoing bags was now 40 pounds heavier than it should be. At 3:30 p.m., male inmates under guard supervision began loading bags onto carts for transport to the loading dock. Marion felt her bag lifted, felt the jarring movement as she was thrown onto a cart with other bags, heard guards talking, joking about the upcoming Christmas leave, felt the cart moving, tried to breathe quietly, despite the panic rising in her chest, as she realized there was no backing out now. At the loading dock, guards performed their standard check. Marion heard the guard's voice. "Check these." Felt the pole jabbing into the bag near her head, near her feet. The pole missed her body by inches both times because of how she'd positioned herself. The guard, satisfied, moved on. The bag was tossed onto the supply boat. Marion felt the impact, felt other bags piled on top of hers, felt the weight compressing her chest, heard the engine start, felt the boat moving. The journey to San Francisco took 45 minutes. For Marion, sealed in canvas with the weight of other bags pressing down, it was eternal. She focused on breathing, on not panicking, on surviving each minute until the next. The boat's movement made her nauseous. The smell of industrial detergent on the linens was overwhelming. Her legs cramped from being compressed. But she held still, held quiet, held on. When the boat docked, bags were unloaded onto a truck. Marion's bag was thrown into the truck bed. She heard the gate close, felt the truck drive for approximately 20 minutes, then stop. heard workers beginning to unload bags. Her bag wasn't grabbed immediately. She waited 30 minutes, an hour, then heard a voice. Last few bags, then we're done. Felt herself lifted and carried, thrown onto a pile inside what sounded like a warehouse. Then, silence. She waited another 30 minutes to be certain workers had left. Then she pulled the internal slipknot, opened the bag from inside, and emerged into a commercial laundry facility. It was after 6 p.m. The facility was closed for the night. Marion found a service door, broke the lock from inside using the small blade she'd hidden, stepped out into San Francisco. She had no money, no identification, no contacts, but she had freedom. She walked until she found a church that was open, went inside to warm up and think. A priest found her there, assumed she was homeless, offered her food and help contacting family. Marion lied, said she'd had a fight with her boyfriend, needed bus fare to get to family in Sacramento. The priest gave her $40 from the church's assistance fund. Marion thanked him, walked to a bus station, bought a ticket to Portland instead. By the time guards discovered Marion's cell empty during the December 7th morning count, she was 300 miles away. The FBI investigation was immediate, but confused. No one could figure out how she'd escaped the island. No tools were missing, no ventilation shafts were disturbed, no boats were taken, no guard corruption was evident. The investigation focused on whether she'd somehow hidden on the supply boat, but guards insisted they'd checked all bags thoroughly. The method remained a mystery. Marion Parker was never caught. The FBI believes she changed her identity, possibly married, lived a quiet life somewhere in America. In 1982, 20 years after the escape, a woman matching Marion's description allegedly confessed to a priest in Seattle on her deathbed, saying she'd been the paper rose, that she'd escaped Alcatraz, that she'd lived a lawful life afterward. The priest, bound by confession confidentiality, never revealed her real name. The FBI file on Marion Parker remains open but inactive. Alcatraz closed as a federal prison in March 1963, just 3 months after Marion's escape. The facility was too expensive to maintain, and the recent escapes had damaged its reputation as an escape-proof institution. Frank Morris and his partners were never found, officially presumed drowned, though many believe they survived. But Marion Parker definitely survived. She beat Alcatraz not through force or complex engineering, but through observation, patience, and exploiting the one assumption the prison made that proved fatal, that women were too weak to escape. The truth is that Marion's escape was possible only because she was a woman in a prison designed for men. The overlooked searches of feminine items, the assumptions about physical limitations, the institutional sexism that made guards underestimate her intelligence and capability. All of these created vulnerabilities that a male prisoner couldn't have exploited. Marion didn't overcome Alcatraz's security. She slipped through gaps in that security that existed because the prison couldn't imagine a woman as a serious escape threat. There's a plaque at Alcatraz National Park today listing the 36 men who attempted escape during the prison's operation. Marion Parker isn't on it, not because historians don't know about her, but because acknowledging her escape requires acknowledging that Alcatraz held women, that a woman succeeded where so many men failed, that the myth of the impregnable island prison was broken not by force, but by someone the system dismissed as unthreatening. If you want to hear more stories about the women who've been written out of prison history, the ones who succeeded precisely because the system underestimated them, subscribe to Prison Diaries. Because Marion Parker's story is a reminder that the impossible is only impossible until someone proves otherwise. And sometimes, the person who proves it is the one no one was watching.